Galactic King attacked Earth, until a U.S. Marine ruthlessly dragged their king through the streets. Snow drifted across the shattered avenues of Washington, D.C., settling over broken marble, twisted steel, and silent bodies, as if winter itself wanted to hide what had happened. Fires still smoldered beneath collapsed buildings, filling the frozen air with the bitter smell of smoke, scorched concrete, and burned metal. Wrecked alien war machines lay scattered beside destroyed American tanks, their impossible technology reduced to lifeless scrap. Torn flags fluttered from broken lamp posts, while distant explosions rolled across the ruined skyline like fatting thunder. Somewhere, a child cried. Somewhere else, a church bell rang one final time before the tower collapsed into the snow. A lone Marine walked through the devastation. His combat armor was cracked from shoulder to knee, blackened by fire and stained with blood that had frozen into dark crimson streaks. One sleeve had been ripped away, exposing a bleeding arm wrapped with a hastily tied field bandage. His breathing came hard, each step heavy, yet his grip never loosened. He was dragging someone. The enormous figure behind him struggled weakly, its jeweled armor scraping across broken pavement. Every pull left deep grooves through snow and ash. A magnificent golden crown had slipped sideways, bouncing against cracked asphalt with every humiliating jerk forward. Purple blood mixed with melting ice, leaving an ugly trail through the capital of a wounded planet. The being was king, supreme ruler of the galactic dominion, conqueror of hundreds of civilizations, the emperor whose fleets had erased worlds that dared resist. Now he could barely lift his head. Thousands of alien soldiers watched from every direction. None moved. Hovercraft floated silently overhead. Towering armored warriors gripped energy rifles but lowered them without command. They stared in disbelief as the monarch they had for centuries was dragged through human streets by one exhausted Marine. The Marine finally stopped. Snowflakes landed on his battered helmet before slowly melting against the warm steel. He looked down at the king, whose glowing blue eyes were filled not with rage anymore but with fear. The Marine spoke quietly. "You attacked our home." Then he pulled harder. The king screamed. The sound echoed between ruined government buildings before the world seemed to freeze around it. Everything dissolved into silence. To understand how the most powerful ruler in known space reached that moment, we have to step back 32 days. It was Tuesday, March 18, 2098. The morning began so ordinarily that history would later struggle to believe it. Children waited for school buses with backpacks slung over sleepy shoulders. Office workers complained about traffic while clutching oversized coffee cups. Baseball fans argued over opening day predictions on sports radio. A retired mechanic in Ohio restored his beloved 1989 Mustang, humming along to Bond. Teenagers laughed over clips from old action movies, insisting nothing would ever match the heroes of the 80s and 90s. Families planned backyard barbecues for the coming weekend. Across America, life moved with comforting familiarity. Captain Mason Hayes barely noticed any of it. 36 years old, broad-shouldered, and quietly respected throughout the Marine Corps, Mason had spent nearly half his life serving his country. His face carried faint scars earned in forgotten battlefields, while his calm gray eyes revealed a man who preferred listening over speaking. Younger Marines often mistook his silence for coldness, until they discovered he would risk everything for every member of his unit without hesitation. Camp had become his second home. That morning, he jogged across the training grounds before sunrise, breathing in the cool Pacific air while recruits struggled to keep pace. He corrected mistakes patiently, encouraged exhausted soldiers without shouting, and somehow managed to make impossible standards feel achievable. His squad reflected his leadership. Sergeant Leo Brooks was a towering Texan whose booming laughter usually arrived before he did. Corporal Danny possessed an endless supply of sarcastic comments capable of surviving even live firefights. Lance Corporal was the youngest, endlessly optimistic, obsessed with classic arcade games, and convinced every difficult situation resembled a video game boss battle waiting to be defeated. Together they felt less like soldiers and more like brothers. Training concluded shortly before lunch. The Marines gathered outside the barracks, eating burgers while arguing over whether Top Gun or Terminator 2 deserved the title of greatest action movie ever made. Top Gun insisted. Danny rolled his eyes dramatically. If your strategy against aliens depends on volleyball, we're all doomed. Leo laughed so hard he nearly dropped his drink. Mason simply shook his head. You three would debate movies during the apocalypse. Danny grinned. Sir, if the apocalypse shows up, it's picking the wrong lunch hour. The others burst into laughter. No one realized how accurate that joke would become. At exactly 12:17 p.m. Eastern Time, every phone vibrated simultaneously. Televisions flickered. Billboards shut off. Computer monitors froze. Then every screen on Earth displayed the same image. An endless star field. The laughter stopped. The stars shifted. Thousands of enormous spacecraft emerged from invisible distortions in space, stretching across the darkness like metallic continents. Some dwarfed aircraft carriers. Others resembled floating fortresses surrounded by rings of glowing energy. Their numbers became impossible to count. People stared upward. Within minutes, they became visible even during daylight. Gigantic shadows crossed continents. Air traffic halted. Military satellites transmitted frantic reports before abruptly going silent. Governments declared global emergencies. Panic spread faster than the ships themselves. Inside the Pentagon, alarms screamed. Across Wall Street, trading stopped. Churches filled. Hospitals prepared for mass casualties they prayed would never come. Social media exploded with theories, prayers, jokes, conspiracy memes, and desperate messages to loved ones. Then the broadcast began. The image of a towering blue-skinned monarch appeared on every screen across Earth. He wore black armor trimmed with living gold, a crown formed from crystalline horns, and a flowing cloak woven from shimmering metal fibers. His eyes glowed like twin stars. "I am king," he declared. His voice carried impossible weight, translated flawlessly into every human language. "I am sovereign of the galactic dominion." Behind him stretched fleets beyond imagination. "You inhabit a minor world, possessing useful resources and strategic value." His expression held absolute certainty. "Your species has two choices." He raised one armored hand. "Surrender within 1 hour." Another finger rose. "Or become an example." The transmission ended. Silence covered Earth. Then humanity reacted in the most human way imaginable. Some prayed. Some cried. Some looted stores. Some volunteered for military service. Some posted jokes comparing the invasion fleet to rush-hour traffic. One viral image showed the alien king wearing sunglasses beside the words, "Wrong neighborhood." Military analysts couldn't explain why millions of frightened people suddenly started making memes. Neither could the aliens. Aboard the flagship, confused officers monitored Earth's internet. One scientist frowned. "They appear amused." Another blinked repeatedly. "They are editing our emperor's face onto dancing animals." A third looked genuinely alarmed. "What is Florida, and why do they keep mentioning it?" No one had an answer. King dismissed the reports with contempt. Primitive minds use humor because they cannot comprehend extinction. Back on Earth, emergency mobilization orders reached camp. Sirens echoed across the base. Marines sprinted toward armories. Aircraft engines roared awake. Mechanics fueled vehicles with practiced speed. Mason read the classified deployment order once before folding it carefully. Global defense. Immediate readiness. Unknown hostile force. Danny adjusted his rifle. So, Leo nodded. So, swallowed nervously. I was really hoping today would stay boring. Mason looked toward the horizon, where dozens of distant black shapes had begun descending through scattered clouds. They're real, whispered. They're real, Mason agreed. Leo checked his ammunition. Danny finished loading magazines before slipping a folded photograph of his family into his vest. Nobody needed motivational speeches. Nobody asked whether survival was possible. They simply prepared. As helicopters thundered overhead, Mason paused beside the American flag, waving above the parade ground. The breeze carried the scent of mixed with jet fuel. He remembered childhood baseball games with his father, his mother's Sunday dinners, fireworks on the 4th of July, crowded movie theaters cheering impossible heroes, ordinary moments that suddenly felt priceless. The descending fleet darkened the afternoon sky. For the first time in recorded history, humanity faced an enemy that believed Earth was already defeated. Mason watched the shadows spread across the nation he loved, tightened his grip around his rifle, and quietly whispered words no alien commander would hear until it was far too late. They picked the wrong planet. The first alien strike did not begin with a dramatic speech or a blazing beam from the heavens. It began with silence. Satellites vanished from military displays one after another, blinking out so quickly that operators first assumed a software failure. Then the communications blackout spread across continents, and the sky itself seemed to swallow every familiar sound. Commercial aircraft turned back. Naval fleets lost contact. Cities stared upward, as colossal shadows drifted overhead like floating mountain ranges. Then the bombardment began. Blue pillars of energy slammed into military installations with terrifying precision. Airfields erupted into fireballs. Missile silos disappeared beneath expanding clouds of dust. Radar stations became molten craters within seconds. Yet something puzzled every strategist aboard the alien flagship. Civilian neighborhoods were left untouched. King wanted humanity terrified, not exterminated. He intended to demonstrate absolute superiority before demanding surrender a second time. Instead, he awakened something he did not understand. Emergency broadcasts reached every television, radio station, and surviving satellite. The president addressed the nation from a hardened command bunker, his voice steady despite the chaos surrounding him. We have suffered the first strike. He paused only briefly. We will not surrender. Across the country, millions stood a little. Captain Mason Hayes climbed into the back of a military transport helicopter beside Leo, Danny, and the rest of their reconnaissance platoon. The cabin vibrated violently as the aircraft lifted into smoke-filled skis. Nobody spoke for several minutes. Every Marine understood that history had just divided itself into before and after. Finally, Danny broke the silence. So, anybody else think aliens look uglier in person? Leo chuckled despite himself. I was hoping they'd at least have better fashion sense. Even Mason smiled faintly. Fear still existed. Humor simply refused to surrender first. Their destination was Lowe's Angels, where multiple alien landing craft had established a fortified beachhead near the harbor. Satellite imagery showed enormous metallic towers rising from the docks, surrounded by glowing defensive shields and hundreds of armored infantry. Local police, National Guard units, firefighters, and civilians had already evacuated tens of thousands of people before organized military resistance arrived. The helicopter banked sharply. Smoke covered the coastline. Container ships burned in the harbor. Collapsed cranes leaned over shattered piers. Alien floated silently above the water, unloading endless columns of soldiers whose polished armor reflected the flames below. Mason studied the battlefield through binoculars. "They're building something." "What kind of something?" asked. "The kind we don't let them finish." Minutes later, the Marines hit the ground. Gunfire erupted almost immediately. Alien rifles fired concentrated bursts of blue plasma that sliced through concrete walls, while Marine rifles answered with disciplined volleys of conventional ammunition. To everyone's surprise, the aliens bled. "Purple." "They're not invincible," Leo shouted. Danny grinned while changing magazines. "Good, I was worried we'd have to read the instruction manual." The platoon pushed through warehouses, shipping containers, and smoke-filled loading yards, forcing alien infantry into close-range combat where their superior technology became less overwhelming. Human adaptability replaced elegant strategy. Forklifts became barricades. Fuel trucks became explosive traps. Construction equipment became improvised battering rams. An alien commander watched the unfolding disaster through tactical displays. Humans are ignoring optimal engagement doctrine. Another officer nodded nervously. They appear to be making decisions, emotionally. The commander frowned. "They're winning." Elsewhere, an elderly dockworker refused evacuation until he finished helping trapped families escape from a collapsed warehouse. A teenage paramedic treated wounded strangers without asking their names. Harbor workers used tugboats to block enemy landing craft despite overwhelming danger. The invasion had transformed ordinary citizens into defenders. Not because they sought glory, because someone had to stand between home and destruction. As afternoon faded toward evening, Mason's platoon reached the unfinished alien tower dominating the harbor. Its surface shimmered with unfamiliar symbols, while streams of energy flowed upward into orbit. "What is it?" whispered. Danny examined scattered equipment. "Whatever it is, it looks expensive." Mason contacted headquarters. No response. Communications remained jammed. That left only one option. Plant charges. The Marines spread out. Explosives disappeared beneath support columns. Timers activated. Alien patrols finally detected them. The firefight exploded across the docks. Energy blasts shattered steel beams. Bullets ricocheted from armored vehicles. Smoke mixed with ocean mist until visibility shrank to only a few yards. Froze when two alien soldiers emerged through the haze. Before they could fire, Leo tackled one while Danny eliminated the second with precise rifle shots. Leo stood breathing heavily. "You owe me lunch." "If we survive," answered. "When we survive," Leo corrected. Mason pressed the detonator. The harbor vanished beneath roaring fire. The unfinished tower folded inward before collapsing spectacularly into the bay. A shockwave rolled across the waterfront, throwing Marines and aliens alike onto broken pavement. The sea swallowed billions of dollars worth of alien machinery within seconds. For the first time since arriving at Earth, the Galactic Dominion suffered a significant battlefield defeat. High above the planet, King watched the destruction in disbelief. They destroyed a quantum gateway. His advisors lowered their heads. "Yes, Your Majesty." "With primitive explosives." "Oh, yes." The king's expression darkened. "They're animals." One elderly strategist hesitated before speaking. "No, Majesty." The chamber fell silent. "They're unpredictable." King dismissed the warning. Meanwhile, celebrations never came on the ground. Too many Marines had fallen. Medics moved from casualty to casualty beneath fatting sunlight, doing everything possible to save lives. Mason knelt beside a wounded corporal who could barely breathe. The young Marine smiled weakly. "Did we stop them?" "For today," Mason replied. "That's enough." Those became the corporal's final words. Night settled over California beneath burning skies. Volunteers carried supplies into damaged neighborhoods while exhausted soldiers established defensive positions. Families emerged cautiously from shelters, bringing bottles of water, blankets, sandwiches, handwritten thank you notes, and anything else they could spare. One little girl approached Mason, carrying a small American flag she had rescued from her destroyed school. "My dad says Marines don't quit." Mason accepted the flag gently. "Your dad sounds smart." She smiled. "I think you'll win." He wished certainty came as easily as childhood faith. Far beyond Earth's atmosphere, hundreds of additional alien fleets exited hyperspace, answering King's command for overwhelming reinforcements. Endless warships stretched across the darkness until they resembled another galaxy forming around the blue planet below. Inside the flagship, a holographic map highlighted one location in flashing crimson. Washington, D.C. King rose from his throne. "If humans crave symbols," he said coldly, "we will erase theirs first." Back on Earth, emergency intelligence reached Marine Command before dawn. Satellite fragments had captured a single encrypted transmission from the enemy fleet, identifying the next invasion objective. Mason unfolded the classified report beneath a dim lantern, and as every Marine gathered around to read the destination, the silence that followed felt heavier than artillery, because every one of them understood exactly what the enemy intended to destroy next. Before sunrise, Washington, D.C., had become the beating heart of Earth's resistance. Military convoys poured into the capital from every direction, their headlights cutting through drifting snow and rising smoke. Engineers reinforced bridges with steel barriers, while civilians filled sandbags beside soldiers they had never met. National Guard units dug defensive trenches along the National Mall. Firefighters extinguished blazes only to race toward new ones moments later. Every church opened its doors as an emergency shelter. Every hospital overflowed. Every heartbeat carried the same silent promise. Not one step backward. Captain Mason Hayes stepped from a transport helicopter into freezing wind that smelled of diesel fuel, burned concrete, and approaching war. His platoon assembled behind him without needing orders. Their uniforms were patched from earlier battles, helmets by plasma fire, faces lined with exhaustion. Yet no one complained. They had seen enough destruction in California to understand what defeat looked like. They refused to let it happen again. An intelligence officer hurried toward Mason carrying a digital tablet filled with satellite images. "The fleet changed formation 3 hours ago." Mason studied the display. Hundreds of alien warships surrounded one vessel that dwarfed every other craft in orbit. "What is that?" "The Emperor's flagship." The officer swallowed. "King is coming personally." Danny whistled softly. "So the boss finally wants to meet us." Leo cracked his neck. "Good, saves us the trip." Stared at the impossible size of the flagship. "Does anyone else think we're becoming way too comfortable with insane news?" Mason handed back the tablet. "Comfort has nothing to do with it." The city prepared through the morning. Tanks occupied intersections once crowded with tourists. Snipers climbed historic buildings overlooking wide avenues. Fighter aircraft circled endlessly above layers of dark clouds, while helicopters ammunition between defensive positions. Ordinary citizens refused evacuation despite repeated warnings. Restaurant owners cooked thousands of free meals for emergency workers. Mechanics repaired military vehicles inside abandoned parking garages. Teachers organized children into underground shelters, transforming subway stations into temporary classrooms so fear would not become their final lesson. Humanity adapted. Again, high above Earth, King stood upon the bridge of his colossal flagship surrounded by shimmering holographic displays. His royal armor reflected countless stars, while commanders awaited his every command. Our gateway has been destroyed. No one dared interrupt. Our landing force has suffered unacceptable casualties. Still no one spoke. The humans continue, resisting despite impossible odds. An elderly strategist finally stepped forward. Majesty, perhaps negotiations. The king's glowing eyes narrowed. They possess no leverage. They possess resolve, the strategist answered carefully. The chamber became dangerously quiet. King dismissed him with a contemptuous wave. Resolve does not defeat empires. The old strategist lowered his head, though deep inside he feared the emperor had already lost something more dangerous than soldiers. He had lost perspective. At precisely noon, the invasion resumed. The clouds split apart. Massive alien carriers descended through swirling snow like floating mountains wrapped in blue lightning. Countless smaller poured from their undersides, darkening the sky until daylight itself seemed to disappear. Air raid sirens echoed across the capital, while every anti-aircraft battery opened fire simultaneously. Missiles streaked upward. Explosions blossomed across the heavens. Alien shields absorbed most impacts, but not all. Several spiraled downward, trailing fire, before crashing into frozen streets. Cheers erupted from nearby defenders. "They fall," someone shouted. "They fall just like everything else." The battle consumed Washington within minutes. Energy blasts shattered monuments. Historic buildings collapsed beneath relentless bombardment. Armored alien infantry advanced through smoke-filled avenues with mechanical precision, while American defenders fought from every doorway, rooftop, and ruined office. Mason's platoon occupied defensive positions near the Lincoln Memorial. Danny peeked over broken marble. "I've got 20 hostiles." Leo adjusted his machine gun. "I stopped counting." Mason raised one hand. "Wait." The first wave entered range. Now, gunfire exploded. Bullets tore through advancing formations before alien plasma answered with devastating force. Marble columns burst apart. Snow transformed into steaming mud. The air filled with flying stone fragments and glowing blue energy. An alien squad attempted to flank their position. "Spotted them first. Left side." Leo rotated instantly, unleashing controlled bursts that forced the attackers into cover. Danny tossed 2 grenades. The explosions echoed across the reflecting pool. Smoke cleared. Nothing moved. "That's for California," Danny muttered. Hour after hour the fighting continued. Neither side surrendered ground willingly. When ammunition ran low, Marines scavenged weapons from fallen comrades. When communications failed, runners crossed open streets carrying handwritten orders beneath relentless fire. Ambulances raced through artillery barrages because wounded strangers mattered more than personal safety. The city itself seemed determined to survive. As evening approached, Mason received new intelligence. An elite alien command unit had established temporary headquarters inside the National Archives. If they access secure government records— "They won't," Mason interrupted. His platoon moved immediately. The streets between their position and the archives resembled another world. Burned vehicles blocked intersections. Storefront windows lay shattered across icy sidewalks. Smoke drifted between abandoned monuments while distant church bells rang through the chaos as volunteers searched collapsed buildings for survivors. Halfway there, Mason heard faint crying. He stopped. Danny frowned. "We don't have time." "We make time." Together they searched the damaged building until discovered a frightened boy trapped beneath fallen beams. The child could not have been older than 8. Leo lifted the debris alone. Danny carried the boy outside while bullets snapped overhead. Nearby medics rushed forward. The child looked back toward Mason. Are the monsters going to win? Mason knelt despite explosions surrounding them. Not while we're standing. The boy nodded bravely. Then don't stop. Those simple words followed Mason all the way to the archives. The historic building had become a fortress. Alien soldiers guarded every entrance while portable shield generators surrounded the perimeter with shimmering blue energy. Inside, towering officers downloaded classified information from government servers. Mason examined the defenses. Danny whispered, "Front door." Leo laughed. "Since when do we use front doors?" Pointed upward. "The roof collapsed over there." Mason smiled faintly. "Exactly." Using damaged scaffolding and broken support beams, the platoon climbed onto the unstable upper floors before descending through shattered ceilings. The aliens never expected humans to enter from above. Close-quarters combat erupted instantly. Hallways flashed with rifle fire. Display cases exploded. Ancient documents scattered through smoke-filled corridors. Alien commanders fought fiercely, but years of Marine training proved equally deadly at arm's length. Mason disarmed one officer before driving him through a reinforced table. Danny slid beneath plasma fire to disable a shield generator. Lee defended a narrow hallway alone, refusing to retreat despite overwhelming numbers. Reached the central control station. I found their servers. Destroy everything. He hesitated. What about intelligence? Mason looked around at the burning building. If we can't carry it, neither can they. Explosives detonated seconds later. The National Archives shook violently as alien equipment disappeared beneath collapsing floors. Purple sparks erupted from shattered machines before the entire command center imploded. Mission accomplished. But victory carried its own price. As the platoon escaped into freezing night, a collapsing wall separated Leo from the others. Mason. Without hesitation, Mason turned back. Ignoring falling debris, he forced his way through choking dust until he reached his friend pinned beneath twisted steel. You idiot, Leo groaned. I outrank you. So I'm allowed. Together they struggled against the wreckage until Danny and returned despite direct orders to withdraw. We're not leaving anybody, Danny shouted. All 4 Marines pushed together. The beam shifted. Leo crawled free just before the remaining ceiling collapsed behind them. Outside, snow began falling again. The platoon stood silently watching the ruined building burn against the dark sky. Exhaustion settled into every muscle. Yet something had changed. The aliens had expected panic. Instead, they encountered loyalty stronger than fear. Far above the battlefield, King received another devastating report. His elite command unit had been eliminated. His intelligence mission had failed. His officers demanded permission to unleash planet-killing weapons and erase humanity completely. The Emperor slowly rose from his throne. No. The chamber looked up in surprise. I will end this myself. He reached for an ancient weapon hanging beside the throne, a blade carried only by rulers who intended to conquer worlds with their own hands. Across the bridge, uneasy silence replaced confidence as the Emperor ordered his royal shuttle prepared. And for the first time since the invasion began, every advisor realized their king was no longer hunting a planet. He was hunting one Marine. The royal shuttle entered Earth's atmosphere without escort. Every alien commander objected. Every strategist begged King to reconsider. He ignored them all. For centuries, the rulers of the Galactic Dominion had led from towering command bridges, directing wars from unimaginable distances. They conquered planets through calculations, orbital bombardments, and overwhelming numbers. Kings did not descend into ruined streets. Kings did not risk their own lives. Believed he was different. He believed legends should be witnessed. His shuttle cut through thick gray clouds, leaving a blazing trail across the winter sky before landing in the heart of Washington with enough force to crack frozen pavement. Dust rolled outward like a tidal wave. The boarding ramp lowered slowly. Silence settled across the battlefield. Alien soldiers immediately dropped to one knee. Humans tightened their grips on their rifles. The Emperor stepped forward. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, his black armor glowing with shifting blue veins of energy. The crown resting above his silver face shimmered like living crystal. Across his back rested a massive sword forged from compressed starlight, its blade humming softly as if eager for battle. His voice thundered across the ruined avenue. "Captain Mason Hayes." The Marine looked up from behind a shattered concrete barricade. "I know your name." Mason climbed to his feet. "So, you have embarrassed my empire." Danny quietly muttered, "Guess we're famous." Leo smirked despite the tension. "I was hopping for better reviews." The Alien King ignored them. "You destroyed my gateway." No response. "You killed my commanders." Still nothing. "You have delayed the inevitable." Finally Mason spoke. "You came all this way to complain." Several nearby Marines actually laughed. The sound confused the alien soldiers more than any weapon ever had. King narrowed his glowing eyes. "You humans laugh while standing before death." Danny shrugged. "Death gets awkward if nobody tells jokes." For the first time in centuries, the Emperor experienced something unfamiliar. Frustration. He had expected pleading. Instead he found sarcasm. Without another word, he raised one armored hand. Thousands of alien warriors surged forward simultaneously. The streets erupted into chaos. Machine guns roared. Missiles streaked overhead. Blue plasma tore through buildings while rockets answered with walls of fire. Windows exploded outward. Burning vehicles rolled across intersections. Snow instantly melted into muddy pools mixed with smoke, oil, and shattered glass. Mason's platoon spread through the debris with practiced precision. Leo climbed onto an overturned armored vehicle, unleashing disciplined bursts that pinned advancing enemy squads behind collapsed buses. Danny darted through broken storefronts, tossing grenades with frightening accuracy. Each explosion shattered another wave of alien infantry. Sprinted between abandoned cars, rescuing wounded civilians trapped beneath collapsed masonry, while somehow still firing accurately whenever enemies appeared. The battle no longer resembled organized warfare. It had become survival. Nearby, firefighters continued pulling strangers from damaged buildings, despite plasma bolts crashing around them. Police officers evacuated families street by street. Doctors treated both soldiers and civilians beneath the shelter of broken monuments. Nobody stopped helping. Nobody stopped fighting. King watched with growing disbelief. "Why do they refuse retreat?" An officer answered quietly. "They believe this city represents their nation." The Emperor scoffed. "It is merely stone." "No, Majesty." The officer hesitated. "To them it is home." The word lingered strangely inside's thoughts. Home. His own people had not used that word in generations. They spoke only of expansion, dominion, conquest, ownership. Perhaps they had forgotten the difference. His thoughts ended as a missile exploded nearby. Enough philosophy. Enough delay. He reached over his shoulder. The royal blade slid free. The weapon illuminated the snow with brilliant white light. Every alien soldier immediately backed away. Even they feared what came next. Mason saw the glowing sword. So it's just you and me now. The king pointed the blade toward him. Come. Danny grabbed Mason's shoulder. Sir. Mason shook his head. You know the mission. Leo frowned. Our mission is staying alive. Our mission is protecting everybody else. Nobody argued. They knew him too well. Mason stepped into the middle of the ruined avenue. Snow drifted quietly between the two warriors. Behind them, the battle gradually slowed. Both armies instinctively created space. The Marine carried only an assault rifle, combat knife, and years of experience. The King carried technology forged by civilizations humanity had never imagined. Neither man looked away. Moved first. His speed shocked everyone watching. The glowing blade sliced through a burned military truck as though it were paper. Mason barely rolled clear before the wreckage exploded behind him. He fired 3 controlled bursts while sliding across icy pavement. Every bullet struck the Emperor's chest. None penetrated. They tickle, said. Mason answered by throwing the empty rifle directly into the King's face. The unexpected move forced the Emperor backward, just enough for the Marine to close the distance. His combat knife flashed. Metal screamed. The knife carved a shallow groove across the King's armored shoulder. Not much, but enough. Purple blood appeared. Alien soldiers gasped. Their immortal ruler could bleed. The Emperor stared at the wound. Disbelief became anger. He attacked relentlessly. Buildings collapsed beneath wild swings of the royal blade. Stone statues shattered. Streetlights flew through the air. Each strike carried enough force to destroy armored vehicles. Mason survived through movement rather than strength. Years of Marine training took over completely. He ducked beneath impossible attacks. He used wrecked cars as cover. He forced the King into narrow streets, where the giant sword became harder to swing. The battle transformed into a brutal lesson. Technology against adaptability. Power against persistence. The Emperor finally understood why humanity remained undefeated. Humans never fought the battle they were offered. They fought the battle they created. Swung again. Mason deliberately retreated beneath the twisted skeleton of a partially collapsed parking structure. The Emperor followed without hesitation. Danny watched from nearby rubble. What is he doing? Leo's eyes widened. Trust him. Massive steel beams groaned overhead. Concrete hung suspended by shattered support columns, already weakened by earlier bombardments. Mason looked upward, exactly where he wanted the King standing. He drew his pistol. Not at the damaged support cables. 3 shots. 3 sharp cracks echoed beneath the broken structure. The cables snapped. Thousands of tons of concrete and steel crashed downward. The deafening collapse swallowed both fighters beneath an avalanche of dust. The earth shook violently. Every soldier on both sides froze, unable to see anything through the enormous gray cloud rising into the snow-filled sky. For several endless seconds, nothing happened. Dust rolled through shattered streets while twisted beams settled with groans that echoed across the silent battlefield. Alien soldiers stared without blinking. Marines held their breath. Snow continued falling, coating the mountain of rubble in a thin white blanket until it resembled an icy tomb, whispered a prayer beneath his breath. Danny clenched his fists so tightly that his gloves creaked. Leo refused to look away. He knew Mason too well to believe the story ended beneath broken concrete. Then the wreckage moved. A slab of fractured cement tilted upward. Another shifted aside. A battered figure emerged first. Captain Mason Hayes stumbled into the open, bleeding from his forehead, his armor crushed across one shoulder, every breath ragged. He looked barely able to stand, yet his eyes remained locked on the ruins behind him. The Marines erupted into relieved cheers that echoed through the frozen streets. Mason ignored them completely. He knew the king had survived, someone as ruthless as would never fall so easily. The rubble exploded outward. King burst free in a storm of shattered steel and pulverized stone, roaring with a fury that silenced both armies. His magnificent armor hung cracked along one side, purple blood streamed from several wounds, and the glowing crown had slipped from his head before disappearing beneath the debris. For the first time in living memory, the emperor looked less like an untouchable god and more like a warrior driven by desperation. He charged. Mason met him halfway. The collision shook the frozen avenue. The emperor's fist smashed into Mason's chest, throwing him through the shattered window of a ruined government building. Splintered glass rained across the floor as the Marine rolled, coughed blood, and struggled upright. Before could follow, Danny fired a rocket from the street. The explosion struck the emperor squarely in the back, forcing him through a crumbling wall. Leo laughed breathlessly. Guess the boss fight has phases. Rose from smoking rubble, angrier than ever. You interfere with your champion. Leo answered by reloading. We're Marines. He's never alone. Those 4 words echoed through the battlefield. Mason stepped back outside. He glanced at his squad only once. No commands were needed. Years of trust spoke louder than orders. Sprinted toward a disabled armored vehicle, restarting its damaged engine with desperate determination. Danny and Leo drew the Emperor's attention with relentless gunfire while Mason circled through drifting smoke. Alien soldiers watched in stunned confusion. Human warriors did not fight for individual glory. They fought together, every movement built upon another's sacrifice. The armored vehicle suddenly lurched forward. Its engine screamed. Aimed directly at. The Emperor turned too late. The vehicle slammed into him with crushing force, pinning him briefly against the shattered remains of a monument before exploding into flames. Mason seized the opening, launching himself through the fire. He drove his combat knife into the fractured seam beneath the Emperor's shoulder armor and twisted with every ounce of strength remaining. Roared in agony. His sword slipped from weakened fingers and clattered across the frozen pavement. Mason kicked it away. The Emperor swung wildly, striking the Marine across the face with enough force to send him skidding through bloody snow. Both warriors struggled to stand. Every movement had become slower. Every breath hurt. Around them, neither army fired another shot. History itself seemed to pause. Looked at the exhausted human before him. You cannot win. Mason wiped blood from his mouth. I already did. The Emperor frowned. You still stand. So do my people. Mason pointed behind him. Families emerged cautiously from shelters carrying blankets for the wounded. Firefighters continued battling flames. Medics refused to abandon the injured. Soldiers helped frightened children cross debris-covered streets even while surrounded by enemy armies. That's victory, Mason said quietly. You couldn't make us stop being who we are. For the first time, the Emperor truly looked. Not at tanks. Not at weapons. At people. Ordinary people. Broken. Terrified. Still helping one another. He suddenly understood why every prediction had failed. Human civilization was never defended by buildings or governments alone. It was defended by millions of ordinary hearts refusing to surrender. That realization arrived one heartbeat too late. Mason stepped forward, grabbed the Emperor by his armored wrist and wrenched him violently off balance, crashed face first into the icy pavement. Before he could recover, Mason locked both hands around the Emperor's arm and began dragging him across the ruined street. The royal armor scraped against broken asphalt. The sound echoed endlessly. Alien soldiers stared in absolute disbelief. Their Emperor struggled. He failed. The Marine dragged him farther, each step fueled by grief, exhaustion, and every innocent life stolen during the invasion. Finally, Mason stopped. Snow settled across both warriors. He looked down at the defeated king. His voice never rose above a whisper. "You attacked our home." He pulled again. No alien moved. No human cheered. The silence itself became the Empire's final defeat.